Carl Arundel and you're watching In Focus. Now I'm pleased to be joined in our studio today by Farhad Ansari. He's the spokesperson and senior coordinator for the Free Babar Ahmad campaign. Babar Ahmad, for those of you who don't know, is a British detainee who has been held for the longest period without trial in the UK. My guest, Farhad Ansari, is the author of numerous reports, including British Anti-Terrorism, a Modern-Day Witch Hunt. He's also a solicitor with the Human Rights Partnership in Birmingham. Farhad Ansari, salam alaikum and welcome to Islam Channel.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Now, before I get on to the issue of Babar's lengthy detention without trial, I'd like to look at the issues which led in March 2009 to Babar Ahmad winning an historic appeal in the High Court against the Metropolitan Police, in which he was granted damages amounting to some £60,000. I understand the court, in granting that compensation, found that officers had subjected to him, and I quote, to serious, gratuitous and prolonged attack at the hands of the police during the arrest in 2003. By any measurement, that was a significant ruling by the High Court against the Met Police, although I found it a bit shocking to discover that none of the officers had been convicted of the assault. Why do you think that was? What was your understanding of that?
Well, I think to understand this, we need to go back in time and get a full picture about what happened. We go back about December 2003. This is the beginning of Babar Ahmad's case as it is known today. Middle of the night, anti-terrorism police came in from the Territorial Support Group, the TSG, who are now notorious for what they did in the G20 riots, demonstrations. They broke down his door, came into his house in the middle of the night while he was sleeping, charged up the stairs and pushed him to the ground against their window, which smashed, and then began subjecting him to a very severe assault. At the end of the raid, Babar had over 73 injuries, 2 life-threatening. He had blood in his urine, he had injuries in his ear canal, very serious injuries. He was examined by consultants who said that this was likely to have taken place as a result of a severe beating. Now, Babar was held for 6 days while his DNA samples, his fingerprints, all the documents seized were examined. His fingerprints and DNA were sent to Pakistan, to Russia, to America for analysis to see if it checked up with any of their intelligence. His home was raided, his father's home was raided, his brother's home was raided. All of this evidence was gathered, and then he was released after 6 days without charge.
Without charge? Without charge.
Now, Babar began a campaign to expose this kind of police brutality. I should mention one serious issue, which was one of the reasons it became such a famous case, was that during the course of the assault, the police placed him in the Muslim sajda position of prostration, with his forehead on the ground and his hands by his side. And as they kicked him and pushed him, they said, "Where's your God now? Why don't you pray to him?" Now, these are the words that resonated in the hearts of every single Muslim who has an ounce of faith in him. Whether they practice or they don't practice, this is something, a challenge to where is your God now. So Babar, motivated by this and what happened to him, more than the injuries, it was this attack on the religion, he began a campaign to expose what's happening with these issues. And it wasn't just him, there's many similar cases, but not so severe. The police, the Crown Prosecution Service, carried on investigating the case. And then in July, they decided that there was insufficient evidence to prosecute Babar with any crime whatsoever. Now, Babar carried on with the case against the police, and it took him many, many years. But as you pointed out, in 2009, he brought a civil action against the police when they finally admitted, the Metropolitan Police, the Commissioner, admitted at the High Court everything that I've just mentioned, that they subjected him to this attack. Point by point, blow by blow, punch by punch, he admitted what they did. He admitted they put him into the prostration position and they yelled at him, "Where's your God now?" They admitted all of this and they gave £60,000 in damages. Now, one would assume that where the commissioners made this admission that prosecutions would follow, which they did. But we had a case in the Crown Court in this May 2011, which lasted 5 weeks. During the course of that case, you had medical evidence, consultants' reports, you had witness evidence, you had Babar's own evidence, you had an audio recording of his house, which picked up the raid. You had CCTV footage of him being brought into the police station in a distressed state, tired, barefooted. You had all this evidence, yet the jury took less than 1 hour to conclude that the officers were not guilty. Everyone was quite shocked, even the judge. Now, the judge was privy to the things the jury weren't, such as the fact that these officers had over 70 complaints against him already by black and ethnic minorities. The jury were not allowed to hear about this. The judge knew about the admission and the settlement of £60,000. The jury did not know about this. So the judge kept telling the jury, are you sure? Do you want to examine this evidence again? Do you want to see this again? And the jury, they absolutely just were adamant. Some jurors wanted to shake the hands of the officers after court. And in fact, as BBC reported, they did shake their hands. So for me, if you're asking me how could this happen, I believe personally that the atmosphere in this country has been so poisoned against anyone accused of terrorism, a Muslim accused of terrorism, that they don't stand a chance in a court. And for members of the public to find these officers guilty would be to come out of your bubble and accept that the authorities in these countries are capable of carrying out the kind of actions they did. That, to me, is why something like this happened.
Well, it probably wouldn't be as shocking to hear a story like that, perhaps in Guantanamo, not now. But to hear this in the UK, it's extraordinary, by the Metropolitan Police, of all the police forces, which only a year ago has passed its 10th anniversary since the Macpherson report, where the police were found to be involved in institutional racism, and there were all sorts of promises that that was going to be cleaned up. But you're just saying that there were, against these very same police officers, over 70 other complaints from ethnic, minority and black groups for similar sort of brutal treatment.
Absolutely, and one of the officers, the ringleader, PC Mark Jones, he is currently suspended again, pending another investigation into a complaint against him. So this is something that is endemic within the Metropolitan Police Force, and any officer for black ethnic minority who has served time in the police force will testify to that this is the situation in there. They came in there thinking they could change things, but in reality the atmosphere is so poisonous inside there that it's impossible to try to change things from within.
So I understand there were calls for another major inquiry following this incident. Has there been any movement on that?
Well, Boris Johnson did call for an investigation into the matter, because something related to the civil action, why the police settled, was that many of the officers decided at the last minute they weren't going to give evidence. Bags of internal mail containing evidence and documents relating to their previous complaints suddenly went missing prior to the hearing. So Boris Johnson called for an investigation into this, and nothing has actually concluded of that yet, but we're hoping.
So is it fair to say that this whole matter has been swept under the carpet?
It would seem so.
Now, perhaps you could shed some light on the relationship between of the 2003 arrest and the subsequent 2004 arrest for extradition request by the US. Clearly, you'd already mentioned that there was no evidence found of any value against him, and he was released without charge after being kept for 6 days.
Right. Now, that was in December 2003. So July 2004, the CPS made this decision: we're not going to prosecute him because we don't have evidence, despite having all these documents in their possession. So 2 weeks later, the US authorities suddenly put in an extradition request for Babar, claiming that he had been involved in fundraising for terrorism in Chechnya and Afghanistan in the 1990s. And a few days later, Babar was arrested. And on his way back from work, he never got home. And he was brought to prison, where he remains to this day. Now, we found out later that that same material that the CPS had stated was insufficient to prosecute Babar in this country was then sent to the Americans, and they have used that as a basis to request Babar's extradition.
Are you sort of suggesting there was a collaboration between the intelligence agencies here in the UK and the US?
Well, it seems very clear that there's a 2-week gap here, where a gap of a few weeks between one government deciding we don't have enough evidence to prosecute him and another government requesting that extradition. Now, even more sinister is the fact that these charges, these allegations, relate to the late 1990s. Now, throughout the late 1990s, there was no extradition request made. It was not made in 2001. It was not made post 9/11. It was not made 2002. It was not made 2003 after the raid. Because until that time, the laws in this country was that any extradition request, you had the right to challenge that evidence in a court of law. You could say, if someone says, Carl, I think you're guilty of 9/11, I'll say, hold on, show me your evidence. I can challenge that. I wasn't in the country. I was here. Now, what happened then was the extradition treaty 2003 between the UK and US, which meant that you don't have to show that evidence anymore. You just need to make an accusation, and because of the relationship of trust and confidence between Britain and America, we can surrender our citizens to the United States. So it's just interesting that the US never sought his extradition for these offences in the past, but suddenly the new treaty comes in, and bang, the first extradition request for Babar Ahmad. The timing is sinister.
Now, I think we've pointed out that Babar Ahmad is the longest serving British detainee in the UK jails without trial. He's now in his 8th year here. How is it that he's in jail here and not in the United States?
Well, he was arrested here, and they have some level of due process where you can challenge the extradition. Now, in the British courts, that ended 4 years ago, where the courts here said he needs to be extradited because the law says he can be extradited. So Babar has appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, saying that his human rights will be violated if he's sent to the United States. Europe has the case under consideration for the last 4 years. So it's only last year that they decided the case was so strong that it required a full hearing by all the judges. So at this week, the UK had their final chance to bring in submissions, so we're expecting a decision in the next few months.
And that decision could mean that Babar faces trial in the US or is freed, is that?
Well, they will make a decision whether to send Babar to the US would violate his human rights. Now, if they find that it would, well, then the obligation is on Britain to release him, because really he should have been released on bail all this time. You're talking about 7 years of a man's life. That is the equivalent of a 14-year criminal sentence. Even if he was convicted in this country of those allegations, he probably would have got a 4-year sentence and then served 2 and been released. Instead, he served the equivalent of 14 years. There's rapists, there's murderers who get out for less.
Now, you've maintained in the campaign that Babar is a British citizen, that you say he's accused of crimes alleged to have occurred in the UK, and so therefore he should be tried here in the UK. But the suggestion is that some of the charges relate to his activities in Afghanistan in the 1990s.
No, what the allegations relate to is a series of websites that Babar was accused of running, which was to raise money for Mujahideen in Afghanistan and in Chechnya in the late 1990s. Now, those websites were hosted on a number of servers around the world. That's what the indictment says. For a period of a few months, one of those servers was hosted in the United States. So the United States have taken their jurisdiction from that basis, although the bulk of it was in the UK. Even Russia, who, if this is relating to Chechnya, Russia would be interested. They haven't requested its extradition. So the point is that it's a very tenuous link.